San Diego, California, November 14, 2004. Two fighter pilots from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz investigate an unidentified aircraft off the coast of San Diego. They encounter a bright white, oval-shaped craft that resembles a massive Tic Tac. It's over 40 feet long, and it has no windshield or wings.
Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at this fly.
And this is David Fravor, skilled pilot. He said, I am looking at speeds, 90-degree angles, stopping. Any human inside of what I'm watching could not sustain life.
We have these videotapes. We can actually calculate the velocity of these objects. We can calculate the G-forces on these ships. So that's the sea change. It used to be that if you were a UFO believer, the burden of proof was on you to prove that you saw something in the sky. Now it's shifted. Now the establishment has to prove that it isn't a visitor from another planet.
For UFO researchers, the recent videos finally provide clear evidence, not only of what the government has been hiding for decades,
Oh my gosh. Look at that thing, dude.
but the potential reason for the cover-up.
The technology is the key. If any single factor explains UFO secrecy, it's the aspiration to acquire extraterrestrial technology. The nation that first acquires that technology is going to be in game-changing territory.
This is truly an arms race. Whoever figures this out first wins. So any developed nation is looking right now to leap ahead with a technological innovation based upon the reverse engineering of what we're seeing in the skies, what our pilots are engaging in the skies, what Commander Fravor chased.
To many, the military's desire to monopolize extraterrestrial technology is reason enough to explain a cover-up. But some believe there are additional motives for government secrecy, while others point to a general culture of bureaucratic secrecy that pervades all of government.
Some disclosure advocates say that the reason why we haven't seen disclosure yet is because of economics. That you have an oil-based economy, and clearly the craft that we see in the skies are not running on oil. They're using advanced propulsion systems that would completely transform the economies of Earth if they're ever implemented.
So, yes, it would have a negative financial impact for the wealthiest people who own the oil in the ground. But it's not the whole story.
The government seems to be completely unaccountable to the American public. They may be accountable to their superiors in the Department of Defense or at NASA or others, but they rarely release anything they do know.
I think we're afraid to find out what these phenomena are. But governments in particular are afraid. And the reason for that, I think, is because the contract between governments and their people is that governments provide security, and then we provide loyalty to the government. If you even raise the issue of the possibility that UFOs are ETs, then that raises big questions about that contract, because it's clear that the government cannot provide security for us from these beings. And that would call into question, well, why should I be loyal to the government and everything else? It would undermine the sovereignty of the government, the sovereignty of the state.
Native Americans in the area around Mount Shasta say that the area above the tree line is sacred, and they warn people, do not go up there.
Is that so?
Right, which makes it not surprising to learn of the number of disappearances that have taken place up there.
So Mount Shasta is one of these hot spots for disappearing people then?
Exactly.
Yes, Siskiyou County is the location that Carl disappeared in.
Since 2009, former police detective Dave Politis has been applying his professional investigative training, attempting to solve mysterious missing persons cases all around the country.
In 10 plus years, I've looked at over 5,000 search and rescue cases. And in those, 1,200 are unexplained. And I mean that cases of possible animal predation have been vetted out. Incidents of mental health, suicide, were vetted out. And what you're left with is a complete void of rational explanation. The area around Mount Shasta has many unusual disappearances.
One of the most baffling disappearances that Dave has been focusing on was reported on Mount Shasta in 1999. On May 25th, 3 experienced hikers, Carl Anders, Milt Gaines, and Barry Gilmore, set off from Mount Shasta's Bunny Flat trailhead towards the summit.
The guys got up to a place called 50-50. It was a place where hikers that wanted to summit would either camp there at the next stop called Lake Helen for the night. The next morning they get up, the wind's howling. The guys were putting the tent together and were stashing it for their climb, and they saw that Carl was looking cold. And so they said, hey, why don't you go to Lake Helen's and we'll meet you there. And Carl took off walking.
Shortly after Carl left the 50-50 campsite, Milt and Barry followed. But when they arrived at Lake Helen, just 650 feet away, Carl was nowhere to be found.
Milt Gaines, Carl's partner, got there, and he didn't see Carl, and now he's confused because there's no place between 50-50 and Lake Helen to disappear. There's no obstructions, you're above timberline, there's no big, huge boulders that are gonna get in your way, and it's a solid snowfield with no crevices. And that started a week-long search and rescue that would rival anyone knew about. Now, one of the things that was done on the Landers case is that they checked with U.S. Geological Survey for seismic activity on the mountain. The reason they did that is that sometimes there's an avalanche of rock, and maybe the climber was covered by the rock and you wouldn't find him. During the time that Carl was gone, there was no seismic activity. So they know that Carl wasn't covered by rocks.
Remarkably, in the more than 20 years since Carl's disappearance, no one has found any clues that could explain what happened to him.
I don't know how many people have been up Avalanche Gulch, but nothing has been found. No metal ice axe, no metal crampons, no colorful nylon pack or coat or black pants or plastic boots, nothing.
The search and rescue coordinator on this event was an individual named Grizz Adams. Grizz had been doing this for 30+ years. Grizz said, Dave, I guarantee Carl isn't on that mountain. He either went up or he went in, but he isn't on. Those were his words. I think that the comment tells you that there were few options for a rational explanation.
Elizabeth Lake, Southern California. This high desert body of water sits at the junction of the tectonic plates that form the powerful San Andreas Fault. The Mexicans who colonized California in the 1700s called it Laguna del Diablo, Lake of the Devil. And it was said that the devil's own pet would come into this world through a portal at the bottom of the lake.
Local legend says that at the bottom is actually an entrance to the underworld. They call it the Lake of the Devil. And it's said that in the middle of the 18th century, from up until about 1880 onwards, something was happening there which frightened locals.
Some of the rich landowners built ranches there. These ranchers claimed to have been harassed and tormented by some sort of monstrous beast that would come out of the water and steal cattle and menace the locals.
The ranchers who claimed to have witnessed this beast called it the Thunderbird, and their description of it was nearly identical to that of the giant bird witnessed by cowboys in Tombstone in 1890.
Eventually, one of the landowners got it in his head that he was going to hunt this creature down and sell it to the circus. So according to the story, this rancher was able to actually fire a few shots at this creature, which seemed to be bulletproof and metallic. The bullets bounced off, and after that encounter, the bird flew east, never to be seen again in California.
Could this so-called Thunderbird really have been the same creature that cowboys shot at in Tombstone? And why was it referred to by locals as the devil's pet?
They didn't have the vocabulary we had today. So when things happened that they couldn't explain, it was called the Devil's Tower, it was called the Devil's Lake, it was called the Devil's this or the Devil's that.
Take it away from religion, and you might find that this was a portal to another dimension, which the locals knew about and might have something to do with the fact that this mysterious entity was present at that very specific location.
If a portal to another dimension or another part of the universe does lie at the bottom of Elizabeth Lake, might it also be possible that the Thunderbird was not really a creature at all, but something even more incredible?
A Thunderbird was enormous. It made enormous noises, so the thunder part of it could sound like a jet engine.
Its eyes was able to literally pierce and emanate fire. We have this large flying winged creature which gives off a thunderous sound and lights fly from its eyes. That to me suggests that we could be dealing with some sort of craft.
Native Indians in North America, they know, of course, the bird. But now something differently arrived. An object which could fly, which is bigger than the eagle, but at the same time makes tremendous noise. So you have the creation of the Thunderbird.
Even when the airplanes first started going out up in the sky here in the Southwest, they referred them to as metal birds. As a matter of fact, when the first fixed-wing craft landed in Zuni, the Indians over there actually went out there and worshipped the airplane.
It makes me think of a concept called cultural tracking, which is the idea that UFOs can mask themselves to appear as almost anything. You go back to ancient China and they talk about the flying dragons. You go back to the ancient Egyptians, they talk about flying boats. You go to the Roman times and they're talking about flying shields. Perhaps that was just their interpretation, or perhaps that's what they actually saw.
In November 2020, William Henry traveled to Weed, California to investigate firsthand if he could document any evidence to help explain the many UFO sightings, baffling disappearances, and encounters with strange beings that have been reported at Mount Shasta. And also to explore the incredible notion that the mountain might actually contain a portal through space and time.
Hi, Dustin. I'm William Henry.
Hi, William. Glad to meet you.
Local author Dustin Neff has spent years investigating the mysteries of Mount Shasta.
One story that I think I'm most excited and interested in is these light beings that are also described as living within Mount Shasta. Can we now tie that into Mu or Lemuria?
Yeah, there's a lot of, supporting evidence, and I think there's something to the stories. Lemuria is a civilization that was quite an advanced civilization for its time, and it existed somewhere off the Pacific coast of North America.
The existence of a lost continent named Lemuria was first proposed by zoologist Philip Sclater in 1864. Curiously, this theory is corroborated by the ancient oral traditions of the native Hawaiian people, which say that the Pacific islands of the region were once part of a giant continent, one that was home to a highly advanced, otherworldly civilization.
We do know that there were some people got lost, and this is what we call the Mu or the Lemuria people you might refer to. They existed at one time, and then we lost them under the ocean.
In the 19th century, there were various
occult and esoteric writers, including Madame H.P. Blavatsky, who identified Lemuria as this primordial human civilization. And the idea was that some of humanity's hidden and occult roots could be traced back to this so-called continent of Lemuria.
Mount Shasta ties in to the idea of the lost continent of Lemuria. They were thought to be very technologically advanced ancestors, maybe gods, maybe extraterrestrials. But whoever these people were, some calamity befell them. And the legend is that the survivors of this cataclysm took refuge in Mount Shasta.
Could there really have been a highly advanced civilization that existed on Earth thousands of years ago? And if so, could there be any truth to the notion that they took refuge from a devastating cataclysm in the caves of Mount Shasta? One man who was convinced the story was true was prospector J.C. Brown, who in the early 20th century made it his mission to find the proof.
You know, J.C. Brown became really enamored with the theories of Lemuria and Mu. J.C. Brown claims to have been up here in 1906 prospecting for gold when he accidentally unearthed a tunnel, which he describes as a man-made tunnel. And about a couple miles in, he found what he describes as some kind of reliquary containing all kinds of records of a lost civilization. And he describes finding the bodies of mummified giants.
Wow.
And one of the things miners did was they would mark the environment with symbols. And there's a place not far from Mount Shasta where I found a whole collection of these glyphs that had been carved into rocks. We know they were made sometime between the early 1900s and the 1940s. And that would have been the period of time that J.C. Brown would have been up in this area, looking around for things.
This reminds me of in Rennes-le-Chateau in France, northwest Arkansas, Oak Island. We find similar kind of symbols appearing in these various places associated with treasuries, deposits. And then this looks like almost like two peaks or a peak within a peak, like he's trying to point you inward into the mountain almost.
There's an interesting twist to this story. About 30 years later, J.C. Brown returned to Stockton, and his intention was to raise an expedition to go back up to this site and catalog what he found. And he raised a party of about 80 different people. And on the day that they were supposed to depart to go up to this site, he just mysteriously vanished.
He just vanishes.
Yeah, no one ever heard from him again.
Pasadena, California, June 17th, 2018. Thousands gather at the Pasadena Convention Center for Aliencon, a 3-day convention to explore the mysteries of ancient civilization, extraterrestrial existence, and the unexplained phenomena of our universe.
I am about to introduce you to a man that in 1968 published a book by the name of Chariots of the Gods. The legend, Eric von Daniken.
Eric von Daniken takes the stage before an audience of 3,500 people, men and women who are convinced that mankind's past and its future is more extraordinary and more hopeful than they had been led to believe by mainstream science.
I would like to say that over the course of history on planet Earth, we've seen great men. Moses being one of those, Abraham Lincoln being another. I'd like to honor you in that same group of men.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. It all started because of religious doubts. That was the power in me to find out what is God. By the way, I still am a deep believer in God. So simply, I had doubts in my own religion. In the meantime, I'm 83 years old. The gods love me.
Since 1968, it's been 50 years. How has the reception of the ancient astronaut theory, in your opinion, changed over 50 years?
It was an immediate bestseller in Germany and in Switzerland. Then it was sold to the United States. He was a bestseller here. And soon as he was a bestseller, I was, of course, attacked. I was crushed down practically by every scientific community, by every scientist, by newspapers. They all found this is nonsense what this young Swiss fellow is writing here. This is garbage. So I was attacked. And I'm not the one who gives up. So I started to fight and fight and fight. So in total, I have written now 41 titles, roughly 76 million copies in 32 languages. Not bad. So.
In the 50 years since Chariots, what do you think are some of the best pieces of evidence that have come forward that you did not cover in Chariots?
Well, of course, all these years, always new material have come. And we know so much more about the Great Pyramid. We detected the rooms, shafts, corridors, things inside, which I never knew in 1966 when I made Chariots of the Gods. Now the sequel of Chariots of the Gods is already on the market, and there is, of course, material in there which you have never seen and you would not believe on this planet.
Irvine, California, April 2017. Ancient astronaut theorist Georgios Tsoukalos is visiting the Keck Carbon Cycle Research Lab at the University of California to see firsthand how radiation can dramatically alter the results of carbon dating.
Dr. Southen,
hi,
Giorgio. Pleasure to meet you. How you doing?
Pleasure to meet you.
I'm here to learn about carbon dating.
Let me show you how this thing works.
All right.
Follow me.
Dr. John Southen is using accelerator mass spectrometry equipment to carbon date a sample of redwood that was exposed to radiation during the testing of atomic weapons in the 1950s. The process begins by sterilizing the wood chip and then exposing it to various chemical processes to remove any contamination. The material undergoes a combustion process and is reduced to graphite for optimal data retrieval. Finally, the graphite is sent through an accelerated mass spectrometer to measure the rate of radiocarbon decay and generate the age of the object.
Pull up a chair.
All right. So what are we looking at here?
Okay, so this is our result here. This is how much radiocarbon was in the samples that we measured from that redwood.
Okay.
And the thing that's strange about them is that the radiocarbon age is negative, which means, at least at face value, these are from 600 years in the future.
Really? Okay.
And the explanation for that has to do with nuclear weapons testing in the atmosphere in the 1950s and 1960s.
This is amazing. In your estimation, do you think that if an object is closer, let's say, to a nuclear testing site, that an item like that would be yielding more crazy results?
If it was really close, yes.
Okay.
So it would give you dates that would be the equivalent of tens of thousands of years in the future.
But I think that's so incredibly fascinating. If any object is exposed to some type of a thermonuclear event, it changes the result of the carbon dating. So I think that it's about time for us to look at our ancient history, because what if something similar happened in our past?
Stories of ancient warfare involving the gods using sophisticated weapons can be found in numerous texts. And ancient astronaut theorists have long proposed that these stories are backed up by physical evidence that can be found throughout the world.
One curious site that seems to indicate some kind of an atomic explosion is the very southwestern corner of Egypt, right up along the border of Libya. And that area is a sandy area, but it is covered with evidence of vitrification. That's what happens when you detonate an atomic bomb. in a desert area, it turns the desert into glass. And also at Mohenjo-Daro, which is on the border of Pakistan and India, were these lumps of glass that had been molten and melted, and there were skeletons that were also found that were radioactive. So the evidence shows that there was some kind of atomic detonation or atomic war in our ancient history.
There are suggestions that there may have been some past nuclear weapons detonation. And if that occurred, then the carbon dating must account for that possibility. And that would make, by the way, everything look younger in carbon dating.